At the most exclusive charity gala in Manhattan, a wealthy white man stood on stage and called his pregnant black wife a mistake. The crowd laughed. Cameras flashed. His mistress poured red wine down the wife's white dress, while 300 guests watched in amusement.
This is unbelievable.
Ellie Carter Wellington stood alone, humiliated her hand, trembling over her 7-month belly. Her husband believed she had no one left. No family, no power, no worth. But he didn't know that in exactly 4 minutes, her 3 billionaire brothers would walk through those doors. And they weren't coming to negotiate. The grand ballroom of the Lexington Hotel had never looked more magnificent. Crystal chandeliers cast golden light across 300 of Manhattan's most powerful faces, their designer gowns and tailored suits worth more than most Americans earned in a decade. This was the annual Whitmore Capital Charity Gala, and everyone who mattered was here. Ellie Carter Wellington stood near the back of the room, her hand resting on her swollen belly. 7 months pregnant, she wore a simple white dress that Randy had chosen for her. He always chose her clothes now, her jewelry, her words. Somewhere along the way, she had stopped making decisions for herself. She watched her husband work the room, shaking hands with investors, laughing with politicians. Randy Whitmore was the kind of man who made people feel important just by looking at them. That was how he had made her feel once. Half a decade ago, when she was still Ellie Wellington, heir to one of the wealthiest black families in America, he had looked at her like she was the only woman in the world. "Your family doesn't understand you," he had whispered on their 3rd date. "They want to control you. They see you as an asset, not a person." She had believed him. God help her, she had believed every word. By their 6th month together, she had stopped calling her brothers. By their 1st anniversary, she had legally changed her name and walked away from her inheritance. She wanted to prove that her love was real, that she wasn't just another rich girl playing at rebellion. Her brothers had tried to warn her. Dominic, the eldest, had flown to New York specifically to talk sense into her. "Something's wrong with this man," he had said. "I've had people look into him. The numbers don't add up." But Ellie had screamed at him to leave. She had called Xavier, her 2nd brother, controlling and paranoid when he questioned Randy's intentions. She had broken Elijah's heart, her youngest brother, who had always been closest to her, by telling him she never wanted to see any of them again. Their mother had been the last to let go. Gloria Wellington had called every week for 2 years, leaving voicemails that Ellie deleted without listening. "I'm still here, baby," she would say. "Whenever you're ready to come home, I'm still here." Eventually, even those calls had stopped, though Ellie learned later that her mother had never stopped praying for her return. Randy had held her afterward, stroking her hair while she cried. "You did the right thing," he had murmured. "Now we can finally be free." But freedom, Ellie had learned, came in many forms, and hers had slowly become a prison. The crowd's applause pulled her back to the present. Randy was walking toward the stage, his silver cufflinks catching the light. Ellie straightened, expecting him to introduce her as he always did at these events. The dutiful wife, the beautiful accessory. Instead, Randy smiled at someone in the front row. A woman with red hair and a dress that left little to imagination. Scarlett Harrington, the fashion designer, who had been a fixture at these events for the past 3 years. The woman whose text messages Ellie had found on Randy's phone 3 months ago. "I'm telling you, you're imagining things," Randy had said when she confronted him. "Scarlett is a business contact. You're being paranoid, sweetheart. It's the pregnancy hormones." Now watching her husband extend his hand to help Scarlett onto the stage, Ellie felt her certainty crumble. "Ladies and gentlemen," Randy announced, his voice smooth as aged whiskey, "I want to thank you all for being here tonight. This gala represents everything I believe in: generosity, ambition, and most importantly, the courage to embrace new beginnings." He turned to look at Ellie across the room, but there was no warmth in his eyes. "Some of you know my wife, Ellie. She's been a part of my journey for these past years." He let the words hang in the air. "But tonight, I want to be honest with all of you. Because that's what this new chapter demands. The crowd shifted, sensing something coming. Ellie was a mistake, Randy said simply. A chapter I'm ready to close. The silence lasted exactly 2 seconds before the whispers began. Then came the laughter. Nervous at first, then growing bolder as guests realized this wasn't a joke. Ellie couldn't move. Her feet had turned to stone, her lungs refusing to draw breath. She watched phones rise throughout the crowd, their cameras pointed at her like weapons. This, Randy continued, pulling Scarlett closer, is the woman who will be standing beside me going forward. Scarlett Harrington, my partner, my future. Scarlett smiled at the crowd, then let her gaze find Ellie. There was triumph in those green eyes, and something else, something cruel. She descended from the stage like a queen approaching a peasant. The crowd parted for her, everyone watching, everyone recording. Ellie wanted to run, but her body wouldn't obey. 7 months pregnant, publicly humiliated, she could only stand there as Scarlett approached. "You should leave," Scarlett said loud enough for the nearby guests to hear. "You don't belong here. You never did." Ellie found her voice. "This is my husband's event. I have every right to your husband." Scarlett laughed, and the sound was picked up by dozens of phones. "Honey, you were never his wife. You were his stepping stone." She held a glass of red wine in her perfectly manicured hand. Later, Ellie would wonder if it had been planned all along. The white dress, the red wine, the cameras already rolling. Scarlett's hand moved in a graceful arc and burgundy liquid splashed across Ellie's chest. The white fabric bloomed red like a wound. The crowd erupted. Laughter, gasps, the clicks of photos being taken, and through it all, not a single person stepped forward. Near the bar, an elderly black woman in an elegant silver gown watched the scene unfold. Mrs. Evelyn Price, former federal judge, felt her heart seize with recognition and shame. She knew she should do something, say something, but her feet remained rooted to the marble floor, paralyzed by the weight of social expectation. Ellie stood in the center of the ballroom, wine dripping down her dress, her hand pressed protectively over her belly. She looked around the room, searching for one sympathetic face, one person willing to help. There was no one. "You know what's funny?" Scarlett continued, playing to her audience. She actually thought he loved her. The poor thing gave up everything. Her family, her money, her name. She leaned closer, her whisper carrying across the silent room. And now she has nothing. Ellie's mind flashed through all those years of memories. Every manipulation, every lie, every time Randy had made her feel crazy for questioning him. "Your brothers don't care about you. They haven't called in years." But they had called. She had blocked their numbers at Randy's suggestion. "Your friends were using you for your family's money. I'm protecting you." But she had lost every friend, and Randy controlled every dollar. "You're too emotional, too sensitive. No one else would put up with you." And she had believed him. She had believed all of it. Standing there, covered in wine, surrounded by strangers who saw her humiliation as entertainment, Ellie felt something break inside her. Not her spirit. Something else. The last thread of denial she had been clinging to for so long. She had been a fool, and now she was paying the price. Somewhere in the room a phone chimed, then another, then a dozen more. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Someone near the door shouted something and heads began to turn. A waiter near the kitchen entrance spoke quietly into his phone. "They're here. Everything happened exactly as expected." The main doors to the ballroom swung open with enough force to silence every voice in the room. 3 men stood in the entrance. Black, tall, wearing suits that cost more than most cars. Their presence commanded immediate attention, immediate recognition from those who followed business news. The Wellington brothers had arrived. Dominic, the eldest, surveyed the room with eyes that missed nothing. Behind him, Xavier's jaw was tight with barely contained fury, and Elijah, the youngest, was already scanning the crowd, searching. His gaze found Ellie, found the wine staining her dress, found the tears on her cheeks. "Oh my God," someone whispered. "That's Wellington media. That's the Wellington family." Randy's face had turned the color of ash. Scarlett took a step backward, her earlier confidence evaporating. Ellie looked at her brothers, the family she had abandoned, the people she had screamed at, rejected, cut from her life, and they had come anyway. "Ellie," Dominic's voice carried across the silent ballroom. Not a question, a statement, an anchor. She opened her mouth, but no words came. All those years of silence, all that time believing she was alone. "We're taking you home," Dominic said simply. Xavier stepped forward, his eyes locked on Randy. "But first we're going to have a conversation with your husband." Randy recovered faster than most men would have. Years of boardroom negotiations had taught him how to mask fear with confidence, and he summoned that skill now as the Wellington brothers advanced through the crowd. "Gentlemen," he said, spreading his hands in a gesture of welcome. What a surprise. I didn't realize Ellie was still in contact with her family. Dominic didn't even glance at him. The eldest Wellington walked past Randy as if he were furniture, his attention fixed entirely on his sister. The crowd parted instinctively, recognizing power when they saw it. "Ellie." Dominic stopped in front of her, his eyes taking in the wine-stained dress, the tears she was fighting to hold back. "You don't have to stay here another second." Behind him, Xavier had positioned himself directly in front of Randy, close enough that the shorter man had to look up. "You think you can humiliate our sister in front of hundreds of people and just walk away?" Randy's smile remained fixed, but sweat had begun to bead along his hairline. "This is a private matter between a husband and wife. I don't see how it concerns you." "Everything about Ellie concerns us," Xavier replied, his voice carrying across the silent ballroom. "It always has." Near the stage, Scarlett was edging toward a side exit. She had almost reached the door when Elijah appeared in her path, his expression deceptively mild. "Leaving so soon?" he asked. "The evening's just getting started." Scarlett's eyes darted around the room, searching for an ally. "I don't know who you think you are, but I have nothing to say to you." "That's fine," Elijah said pleasantly. "You can listen instead." Back in the center of the room, Dominic was helping Ellie toward a chair. She moved stiffly still in shock, unable to process what was happening. Her brothers were here. After all those years of silence, after all the terrible things she had said to them, they were here. "How did you know?" she whispered. Dominic's jaw tightened. "We never stopped watching. We never stopped caring." Randy pushed past Xavier, his composure cracking. "Now wait just a minute. Ellie is my wife. Whatever issues we're having, we'll work them out privately. This doesn't require a family intervention." Xavier grabbed his arm. "Don't you walk away from me." "Get your hands off me." Randy yanked free, his voice rising. "Security, I want these men removed immediately." Two security guards stepped forward hesitantly, looked at the Wellington brothers, and stopped. Everyone in the room knew who signed their paychecks, and everyone knew that the Wellington family could buy this entire hotel with pocket change. Dominic finally turned to face Randy. When he spoke, his voice was calm, almost conversational. "Do you know what's happening right now, Randy? You're trespassing at my event." "No." Dominic held up his phone. "Right now, 3 million people are watching this conversation live." The color drained from Randy's face. "What? This gala has been streaming since the moment you took that stage. #Justice for Ellie is trending #1 nationally." Dominic's smile held no warmth. "Every word you said about my sister, every moment of her humiliation, the whole world watched." A ripple of horror spread through the crowd. Guests clutched their phones, suddenly aware that they might be visible to millions. The laughter that had accompanied Ellie's humiliation now seemed monstrous in retrospect. "That's illegal," Randy sputtered. "You can't record without consent. I'll sue you for everything you have." Elijah spoke up from across the room, still blocking Scarlett's escape. Actually, New York is a one-party consent state. The journalist who's been streaming only needed her own permission. He smiled. Funny how that works. Ellie looked up at Dominic. You planned this? We've been planning for 2 years, her brother replied quietly. Ever since we first suspected what he was doing to you. Randy laughed, but the sound was brittle. What I was doing to her, I gave her everything. A home, a lifestyle. I took care of her when her own family abandoned her. You isolated her. Xavier's voice cut through the room like a blade. You made her believe we didn't want her. You intercepted her calls. You controlled her money. You spent years breaking her down piece by piece. Lies. Desperate lies from a family that couldn't accept their precious daughter chose someone outside their approval. Elijah pulled a folder from inside his jacket. Then perhaps you can explain these. He walked toward the center of the room, spreading documents across an empty table. The crowd pressed closer, curiosity overcoming caution. These are text messages, Elijah announced loud enough for everyone to hear. Messages sent to Ellie over the past 4 years from accounts pretending to be old friends, all of them encouraging her to cut ties with her family, all of them telling her that her brothers didn't really love her. Ellie's breath caught. Those messages, I thought they were from Rachel, from Denise. They were from your husband, Elijah said gently, using fake accounts he created specifically to manipulate you. Randy's face had gone from white to red. This is fabricated. You manufactured evidence to destroy me. Did we manufacture these? Dominic held up another document. Bank records showing you transferred Ellie's personal savings into accounts under your sole control. Emails to financial institutions claiming she was mentally unstable and needed you to manage her affairs. The whispers in the crowd were growing louder now. Phones that had been recording Ellie's humiliation were now capturing something very different. Scarlett made another attempt to leave, but Elijah shifted to block her. You might want to stay for this next part. It concerns you directly. I don't know anything about his finances, she said quickly. Whatever he did, I wasn't involved. Xavier pulled out his own phone and pressed play on an audio recording. Randy's voice filled the ballroom, clear and unmistakable. She has no one left. Her family hates her. Her friends are gone. She's completely dependent on me now, exactly where I want her. Scarlett's voice responded from the recording. And you're sure she won't find out about us? Even if she does, what can she do? She gave up everything to be with me. She's trapped. The recording ended. Scarlett's face had turned the same shade as her hair. Ellie stood slowly, her legs unsteady. You knew. The whole time. You knew what he was doing to me. Scarlett's eyes flashed with something between guilt and defiance. You had everything handed to you. The family name, the money, the connections, and you threw it all away for him. Don't act like you're some innocent victim. So that made it okay to destroy me. I didn't destroy you. He did. I just benefited from it. Mrs. Evelyn Price, who had been watching from near the bar, finally stepped forward. Her silver gown caught the light as she moved through the crowd, and several guests recognized her with barely concealed surprise. A former federal judge didn't attend many society events, and her presence here suddenly seemed less coincidental. I've heard enough, Mrs. Price said, her voice carrying the authority of decades on the bench. I witnessed what happened tonight. The public humiliation, the assault with the wine glass, and now this evidence of systematic abuse and manipulation. She turned to Ellie. I should have spoken up sooner. When that woman poured wine on you, I should have intervened. Instead, I stood there like everyone else, too concerned with social appearances to do what was right. Ellie didn't respond. She was staring at the documents, at the evidence of her husband's betrayal laid out for the world to see. Randy made one final attempt to seize control. He straightened his jacket, forced his features into an expression of calm reason. Ladies and gentlemen, I understand this looks concerning, but these men have an agenda. The Wellington family has been trying to interfere with my marriage since the beginning. He turned to face the crowd directly, his voice taking on the persuasive tone that had won over countless investors. Everything you've heard tonight is taken out of context. My wife and I have had difficulties, yes. What marriage doesn't? But I've never done anything illegal. Is that so? Dominic's voice was almost casual. Then perhaps you can explain this. He produced a thick manila envelope and handed it to the nearest guest, a silver-haired man Ellie recognized as one of Randy's biggest investors. 2 years ago, I hired a private investigation firm to look into Whitmore Capital. Not because of Ellie initially, because the numbers didn't add up. The silver-haired man was flipping through the documents, his face growing paler with each page. What you're holding, Dominic continued, is evidence of securities fraud, money laundering, and investment theft. Your husband didn't just manipulate my sister. He's been stealing from his clients for years. That's a lie. Randy lunged forward, trying to grab the envelope, but Xavier caught him by the collar and shoved him backward. Don't make this worse for yourself, Xavier growled. Other investors were gathering around the documents, now passing pages between themselves. Ellie watched their expressions shift from skepticism to confusion to dawning horror. My retirement fund, one woman gasped. He said it was performing below market. He said there was nothing to be done. The charitable foundation, another man muttered. Millions of dollars. Where did it actually go? Randy was breathing hard, now his eyes wild. You can't prove any of this. I have lawyers, the best lawyers in New York. I'll tie this up in court for years. Your lawyers, Dominic said calmly, are currently being questioned at the FBI field office downtown. As if on cue, the ballroom doors opened once more. 6 people in dark suits entered, led by a black woman with close-cropped hair and an expression of professional determination. Randy Whitmore. The woman held up a badge. I'm Special Agent Patricia Coleman, FBI. You're under arrest for securities fraud, wire fraud, and money laundering. Randy stumbled backward. This is a setup. The Wellingtons orchestrated this. They're framing me. Sir, you have the right to remain silent. Agent Coleman advanced steadily. I'd suggest you exercise it. No. Randy spun toward the crowd, toward the investors who had trusted him with their fortunes. You know me? We've worked together for years. Are you really going to believe these people over me? No one spoke. No one moved to help him. Agent Coleman nodded to her colleagues. 2 agents stepped forward with handcuffs. As the metal clicked around Randy's wrists, Ellie watched the man who had controlled her life finally lose control of his own. Ellie, Randy called out as they led him toward the door. Tell them this is a mistake. Tell them I love you. Everything I did was for us. Ellie met his eyes. For so long, those eyes had made her doubt herself, made her feel small, made her believe she was nothing without him. No, she said quietly. Everything you did was for you. I was just the fool who let you. Across the room, another agent had approached Scarlett. Scarlett Harrington. You're also under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud and money laundering. Whatever composure Scarlett had maintained finally shattered. I didn't know he told me the money was legitimate. He told me we would be together once he dealt with her. You can explain that to your attorney. The agent produced handcuffs. Scarlett's mascara ran in black streams down her face as she was led away. She passed Ellie without a word, but their eyes met briefly. In Scarlett's gaze, Ellie saw something unexpected, the dawning recognition of a woman realizing she had also been used. The ballroom had descended into chaos. Guests were shouting questions, demanding answers about their investments. Others were frantically making phone calls. The carefully orchestrated evening of wealth and privilege had become something else entirely, a crime scene. Mrs. Evelyn Price appeared at Ellie's side. There will be questions, investigations, depositions. As a former judge, I can help you navigate what comes next. Ellie looked at her. You didn't help me when it mattered. The older woman accepted the accusation without flinching. No, I didn't, and I'll carry that shame for the rest of my life. She reached out and gently touched Ellie's arm. But I'm here now, if you'll let me be. Before Ellie could respond, Elijah was beside her, his hand on her shoulder. We should go. There's nothing more for you here. Ellie nodded slowly. The wine had dried on her dress, leaving a dark stain like a map of everything she had endured. She looked around the ballroom one final time at the wealthy guests who had laughed at her humiliation at the cameras, still recording at the empty space where her husband had stood. Then she turned and walked toward the exit, her three brothers forming a protective wall around her. As they reached the doors, the crowd parted silently. Some guests looked away in shame. Others watched with something like respect. The same people who had stood by during her humiliation now stepped aside as she passed. Outside, the night air was cool against Ellie's face. Police cars and news vans were already gathering in front of the hotel. Cameras flashed as she emerged, but her brothers shielded her from the worst of it. Dominic guided her toward a waiting car. There's a lot we need to talk about, but not tonight. Ellie stopped at the car door. Why did you come after everything I said? After I told you I never wanted to see you again? Dominic's expression softened for the first time all evening. Because you're our sister, and Wellington doesn't abandon family. Xavier opened the car door. We can discuss the details later. Right now we're getting you somewhere safe. Ellie climbed into the car, her brothers following. As the vehicle pulled away from the hotel, she looked back through the rear window. She could see Randy being led to a police car, his hands cuffed behind his back. Scarlett was being loaded into another vehicle, her red hair disheveled, her designer dress wrinkled. The man who had stolen so many years of her life was finally facing consequences. But Ellie felt no triumph, only exhaustion, and the first fragile stirrings of something she had almost forgotten how to feel: hope. The Wellington family penthouse overlooked Central Park, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a view that most New Yorkers would never see. Ellie sat in a private room on the upper floor, still wearing the wine-stained dress. She had refused to change. Some part of her needed to keep wearing the evidence of what had happened, as if removing it might make the night feel less real. Her brothers had given her space. She could hear them talking in low voices somewhere down the hall, making phone calls, coordinating with lawyers and publicists, taking care of things the way they always had, the way she had rejected for half a decade. The door opened quietly. Elijah entered alone, carrying a cup of tea that he set on the table beside her. You don't have to talk, he said, settling into a chair across from her. I just didn't want you to be alone. Ellie wrapped her hands around the warm cup, but didn't drink. I said terrible things to you. The last time we spoke, I told you that you weren't my brother anymore. I remember. How can you even look at me? Elijah leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. Do you remember when we were kids? You were maybe 7, and you decided you were going to run away because Mom wouldn't let you have a puppy. Ellie almost smiled, despite herself. I packed a suitcase with nothing but books and cookies. You made it about 3 blocks before you got scared and came back. And when you walked through the door, Mom didn't yell at you. She just hugged you and said dinner was ready. Elijah's voice was gentle. That's what family does, Ellie. We don't keep score. We just keep the door open. Footsteps in the hallway announced Dominic and Xavier's arrival. The eldest brother stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. Xavier leaned against the wall, his earlier anger replaced by something more complicated. The lawyers are handling the immediate aftermath, Dominic reported. The FBI has enough evidence to keep Randy in custody without bail. His assets are frozen pending investigation. Ellie nodded slowly. And Scarlett, same situation. She's claiming she didn't know about the fraud, but the recordings suggest otherwise. Xavier pushed off the wall and walked toward the window. You know what I keep thinking about all those years. For all that time, that man had you convinced that we didn't love you, that we had abandoned you. Xavier, Elijah warned. No, let me finish. Xavier turned to face Ellie. I'm angry. I'm not going to pretend I'm not. Every holiday, every birthday, every time something good happened in my life, I wanted to call you. And I couldn't. Because of him. Ellie's eyes filled with tears. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. I'm not looking for an apology. Xavier's voice cracked slightly. I'm trying to tell you that being angry doesn't mean I stopped loving you. Not for one single day. The room fell silent. Ellie looked at her three brothers, Dominic, who had quietly investigated Randy for 2 years without ever telling her. Xavier, whose fury masked a wound that had never healed. Elijah, who had simply sat with her in her pain without demanding anything in return. I gave up everything for him, she whispered. My family, my inheritance, my sense of self. I was so determined to prove that I wasn't just a rich girl playing at love that I ignored every warning sign. Dominic finally entered the room, fully taking a seat near the window. You were 23 when you met him, young, idealistic. He was a predator who knew exactly how to exploit that. That doesn't excuse what I did to all of you. No, Dominic agreed. But it explains it. And explanation is the first step toward healing. Ellie set down her tea, her hands trembling. How do I come back from this? The whole world watched me get humiliated tonight. They saw me as a victim, as a fool. Is that what you are? Elijah asked quietly. A victim, a fool. I don't know what I am anymore. Dominic stood and walked to where Ellie sat. He knelt in front of her, something the eldest Wellington rarely did for anyone. You're a survivor. You're a woman who was systematically abused by someone she trusted, and you're still here. Still fighting. I wasn't fighting. You three did all the fighting. We opened the door, Dominic corrected. You're the one who has to walk through it. He reached into his jacket and produced a phone. The media is going to want your story. Journalists, talk shows, podcasters. Everyone wants to hear from the woman at the center of this scandal. Ellie recoiled. I can't face all those cameras, all those questions. You don't have to, Elijah said quickly. We can handle the press, issue statements on your behalf. You never have to say a word publicly if you don't want to. Xavier nodded in agreement. We're not going to push you into anything. But Dominic held Ellie's gaze. That's true. We won't. But I want you to consider something. He placed the phone in her hands. For all those years, Randy controlled your story. He decided what people thought about you. He decided what you thought about yourself. Ellie looked down at the phone. This is your chance to take that back, Dominic continued. Not for revenge, not for publicity, but because your story belongs to you. And you deserve to be the one who tells it. The words hung in the air. Ellie thought about all the times Randy had spoken for her at parties. All the times he had told her what to wear, what to say, how to behave. She had given him power over her narrative, and he had used it to erase her. I need time, she finally said. I need to figure out who I am without him before I can tell anyone else. Dominic nodded and stood. Take all the time you need. We're not going anywhere. 2 months later, Ellie gave birth to a healthy baby girl in the master bedroom of the Wellington family estate. Her mother, Gloria, held her hand through the delivery tears streaming down her face as she whispered prayers of gratitude. Her 3 brothers waited anxiously in the hallway, pacing like expectant fathers. When the nurse placed the baby in Ellie's arms, she looked down at the tiny face and felt something shift inside her. All the pain of the past, all the shame and self-doubt seemed to recede in the presence of this new life. What are you going to name her? Gloria asked, smoothing back her daughter's hair. Ellie smiled through her tears. Hope. Her name is Hope. In the months that followed, the legal proceedings against Randy and Scarlett played out in courtrooms and headlines. Randy was convicted on all counts: securities fraud, wire fraud, money laundering. The judge sentenced him to 25 years in federal prison. His assets, what remained of them after restitution to his victims, were seized by the government. Scarlett received a lighter sentence of 5 years, having cooperated with prosecutors in exchange for a plea deal. Her fashion career was destroyed. Her social connections evaporated. In a letter she wrote from Prison 1 that was later leaked to the press, she admitted that she had seen the signs of Randy's fraud, but had chosen to ignore them. She had been so desperate for the life he promised that she had become complicit in his crimes. Mrs. Evelyn Price kept her word. The former judge became an advisor to Ellie's newly formed foundation, an organization dedicated to helping women escape abusive relationships and rebuild their lives. The foundation provided legal assistance, financial counseling, and perhaps most importantly, a community of survivors who understood what it meant to reclaim your identity after someone tried to destroy it. Ellie eventually did tell her story, not to a talk show or a news magazine, but in a memoir she wrote herself in her own words on her own terms. The book became a bestseller not because of the scandal, but because of the honesty with which she examined her own choices and the long road back to herself. On the 1-year anniversary of the gala, Ellie stood on the balcony of the Wellington estate holding Hope in her arms. The sun was setting over the gardens, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. Elijah joined her, leaning against the railing. "You look happy?" "I am." Ellie adjusted Hope's blanket. "It's strange. I spent so long thinking that happiness meant being with someone, being loved by a man. But this—" She looked down at her daughter. "This is enough. More than enough." "You know what I've learned," Elijah said. "True wealth isn't money. It's not power or status or the things Randy spent his whole life chasing." "What is it then?" Elijah smiled. "It's having people who will walk into a room for you when the whole world walks out." Ellie thought about that night at the gala. The laughter of the crowd, the wine dripping down her dress, the absolute certainty that she was alone, and then the doors opening, her brothers walking in. "I spent so long running from my family," she said softly, "thinking I had to prove I could make it on my own, thinking that needing people was weakness. And now—" Ellie looked back at the house where Dominic was reviewing documents in his study, and Xavier was arguing with someone on the phone about a hotel renovation. Her mother was in the kitchen preparing dinner and humming an old song. "Now I know the truth," Ellie said. "The people who love you don't make you weak. They're the reason you're strong enough to survive." Hope stirred in her arms, opening her eyes briefly before settling back to sleep. Ellie held her daughter close and watched the last light fade from the sky. She had lost so many years to a man who saw her as nothing more than a stepping stone. But she had gained something far more valuable in return: the knowledge that she was never truly alone and never had been. The Wellington family didn't measure wealth in dollars. They measured it in loyalty, in sacrifice, in the willingness to walk through fire for the people they loved. And by that measure, Ellie was the richest woman in the world.